Welcome to Recovery Comes Home Radio, your go-to podcast for all things related to addiction recovery. Whether you are an individual in recovery, a concerned loved one, or a dedicated professional, this podcast is tailored just for you. Here we are all about empowering you with the tools, insights, and inspiration you need to move forward. So grab your headphones, tune in, and let's embark on this transformative journey together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Recovery Comes Home Radio. Today, I have Brenda Peterson. Brenda knows her way around a layoff. Since forever, she has worked in the field of learning and development, except for the many, many times she's had her position eliminated. All told, she has had 7 workdays that started with lots of obligations, but ended in unemployment. Now, Brenda L. Peterson, the layoff lady, is a career coach who waxes poetic on layoffs, job transitions, and career resilience. She also is an engaging presenter and the author of a book, 7 Lessons from 7 Layoffs, a guide. Brenda, welcome to our Recovery Comes Home Radio family.
Thank you so much.
So, this is a show about addiction recovery, and people might be wondering, okay, why she got the layoff lady on here? But as we've talked before earlier in the green room and our other conversations along the way, there's a lot of correlations between the two, aren't there?
Definitely. And I think a lot of that comes down to struggle. And when I think of my experience being laid off, it's a case where I had all sorts of plans for my life, and then something happened, whether it was a change in leadership at the company where I worked, whether it was a worldwide crisis or a pandemic or a tragedy or terrorism, just depending on the industry that I was in. And then suddenly everything kind of got pulled out from under me, and I had to figure out what do I do now with myself, and how do I rebuild? I also think it's a case where when you go through a layoff or even multiple layoffs, you get questions from people that I think are well-intentioned, but that hurt, like, well, how come this keeps happening to you? Nobody else seems to have a problem keeping a job. How come you have that problem?
Yeah, it happened 7 times. It certainly must be you.
You'd think you'd be used to it by now, literally. Yeah. And I think sometimes there's a lot of what I think it's easy when you're sitting in that seat. There's a lot of blame that how come you can't get your act together, or a lot of just judgment that sometimes goes along with that, or people who are trying to be helpful, and some of the things that they tell you, you're like, this is not helpful. This is hard. This is, and I think it's that people sometimes don't understand the struggle that you go through, because what they see on social media or talking to you in passing is like, hey, you seem to be doing great. Everything's fine. No problems in the world.
Fine.
Right. And I do, but they don't see all the times that I'm, trying to figure out what to do with myself and trying to manage my energy and saying, okay, I've hit a wall at these 3 things. What do I do now? How do I adjust? And some days when you're like, I can't do much of anything because I just don't have it in me. And other days where it looks like you accomplish miracles. So I think it's like a lot of life where from the cheap seats, other people see just this little tiny bit of what you're going through. And in reality,
the overnight sensations, right?
Oh, yeah. The overnight sensations.
Overnight.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Very true.
So, well, yeah. And you know what's funny about what you just said? Our audience can really relate to being torn down and having to rebuild back up.
Yeah.
That's a lot of them have been to 7 treatment centers, if not more.
Yep.
And so kind of the same thing happens with the shame and the guilt and the stigmatization of, why can't you just get your act together?
Yeah.
Something must be wrong with you.
Or you're not trying hard enough.
Not trying hard enough. Yeah, just try harder. Just, why aren't you filling out applications? We've heard it all. And and as I talked to you before, we have lots of people in our recovery residents and the people that we worked with through case management who really struggle with, they might be high achievers, right?
Yeah.
And 6-figure earners, but when they're not, they're not.
Yeah.
and then they've gotten a job, but they can't keep it because they're too in love with the drink or the drug or the behavior to put a priority to working.
Yep.
Yeah. So while you were going through that, because I have a health condition, so I know what it's like to start over again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So I've been in 2 comas, paddled back to life in 2016. I was in hospice in
Goodness.
2008 for 3 months, and everybody was writing me off. So
Yep.
what I feel like is anything that is a life altering transition. We developed the ABCs of recovery for life altering transition. A, accept your situation and take action. B, be brave enough to start over and over and over until you get your desired results. And C, cultivate a stellar support system because you cannot do this world alone.
And it all applies. Every last one of those applies. So I recently wrote the book called 7 Lessons from 7 Layoffs. And my goal for that book was just to share my experiences with other people who are going through this so they know they're not alone. So they know that there are ups and downs and bumps and bruises you're going to face. But in the end, if you keep on doing the right things, you'll get to the place you need to.
Right.
So
That's the next right thing. That's what we
yeah,
tell people too,
yep. And I love that because I think sometimes if we overfocus on results, there's so much we can't control when it comes
Yeah.
to results, but we can control, like you said, our next action. We can control doing the right things.
What in this moment I choose. And
Yes,
we
I love
talk
that.
about that a lot in recovery because when people first get to us, they're very used to action reaction, feeling reaction. There's no pause. And Viktor Frankl said that the power to choose is in the pause.
Yes. I love that. I love that.
Right. So you have to
Yeah.
take a time out in between and go, wait a minute, maybe I need to reassess here.
Yeah. And I know, so in my book, there are a few different areas that really relate to that. So when you
Yeah,
talk
go
about
ahead.
accepting your reality,
Yeah.
one of the lessons that I have is experience your emotions and manage your mindset.
Yeah.
Because again, you have to come to terms with it. I think one of the things that people lots of times do if they lose their job is they're like quickly, without thinking, I got to go find something else right this moment. And
Absolutely.
when
And
you
then they
when you
settle.
right, or that you act out of panic and then you're like, well, now I'm just in a different bad situation and I've taken away some of my options because I didn't pause, think about, how am I doing, think about what are the business things I need to take care of, and they jump to a solution, which sometimes you'll end up just making things a little worse. They're just different worse, I
Different
guess.
words. Yeah. You're still in the murk
Yeah.
and the
Yep.
mire, but we've found, at least through our last 15 years of experience, that you need that pause, and that includes
Definitely.
jumping from one thing to another because you need to play those tapes out.
Yeah.
Have time to play those tapes out and go, okay, well, am I really feeling called to this job, or am I just taking it because I'm desperate? And decisions made out of desperations aren't ever usually the right ones.
No, and decisions made out of fear
Out of fear.
Or again, worrying about what people think. If there's so many reasons that we make decisions that have nothing to do with what's best for us. And so part of it is figuring out how to both ask for help, but also filter that help through what do I actually need. Because sometimes when people tell you exactly what to do, it's like, well, maybe that's what would make sense for you to do. But for me, that's not the right thing for me to do in this point in time.
Yeah. And when we say that's another parallel is we say all the time, what works for one person might kill another person.
Yep. Very true. So it gets down to also knowing yourself and
yes,
again,
trusting your gut.
And figuring out that next right thing. One of my other lessons that I have is help people help you. I think sometimes when there's a big life challenge, we feel like we need to go it alone. Like we're weak if we ask for help, like we're weak if we need things from people. And that's
or
exactly
we're stupid if we can't figure it out.
And none of that's helpful right
and
then.
none of it's helpful.
No, I love so I think it's so important to build your support system. ask for help. Also make sure that you've done some thinking whenever possible about what help looks like for you. Because sometimes some people in general, my experience has been that people really want to help. They just don't always know what to do. So sometimes they do things and you're like, oh, that wasn't it, but I love you for trying, you know? So
Yeah.
I think it's knowing, like, what do you need? Do you need someone to watch your kids so that you can go to a job interview? Do you need help getting to a job interview? Do you need help researching a company? Do you need somebody to introduce you to somebody else? Can somebody look at your materials? But it's trying to figure out what will be most helpful for you and how to really ask the right person to help you, and hopefully not rely all on one person, because I think that's how we burn people
I
out.
think that's an excellent point. Yeah. One person can't do it all. In fact, it's been a long time ago, so I'm going to have to dig into the archives here, but there was an article on the 5 friends you should have, right? And one was the cheerleader, one was
Yep.
the realist, right?
Yep.
Because we can't be all things to all people. And even in my marriage, right? I mean, I've pledged myself to one guy for the duration. That doesn't mean that he meets all my needs.
Yep.
Eh,
And that would be hard to expect everything from one person. And I think especially, and that's where your support system is so helpful. That way you're also not overburdening any one person.
right.
And
You're not dumping your stuff on.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then you're also, and I always strive to make mutually beneficial relationships, so that when I'm asking somebody for help, I'm also giving them whatever help I can, and knowing that going forward I'll continue to help. It's been interesting having gone through 7 layoffs, and again 3 over the course of about 5 years. It's like, hi, it's me, I'm back here hat in hand hoping that you can help me do
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
And part of my effort in writing that book is, here I've learned a ton doing this, how can I get this out there so other people can have that resource to know, like, what the heck do I do with
And
myself?
not have to get laid off 7 times.
That's the other hope. And part of that, when I think about that, it's like we're getting into the idea of career resilience. Like, what are my contingency plans? What do I do if something bad happens or something unexpected happens? Like, what's my response to that? And that gets into, what's that next right decision? So I have a whole section where I talk about contingency planning, and it's called assess, adapt, and rise above. And you don't always have to do the perfect thing, but it's like, for example, when you're job searching, I think sometimes you see a job and you're like, oh, this is the one that's going to work out. This is my job. And when it doesn't, then you're heartbroken because you put all your eggs in that
Yeah.
basket of this job that you hadn't even applied for, but you just decided you were perfect. And so it's a matter of saying, well, how many jobs am I going to apply for a week? How many people am I going to follow up with? How many new people am I going to meet? And what kinds of skills can I develop so that in the future I'm more marketable? And how many people can I meet so that in the future I have closer connections to potential organizations? But yeah,
Yeah.
just
And
that
that's all
assessing and
about
adapting.
connection.
Yes.
Right.
And I,
And that's
yes,
Gabor Mate says the opposite of addiction is not abstinence, it's connection.
yes, I love that.
So we need to connect on it's very hard in today's modern society. People typically, I'm painting with a really wide brush here, but people mostly are concerned about themselves
Yeah,
and what's going on in their lives.
very true.
So there's a song by Alanis Morissette called Empathy. And the chorus goes, thank you for seeing me. I feel so less lonely. Um, and then it says, to know myself enough to let you help me. Right. So that to me says
Very true.
you have to know what you want. Plenty of people, like when someone dies, when someone's ill. I've been ill for 48 out of my 52 years. I could, if I had $1 for every time somebody said, call me if you need anything. Oh yeah. Well, I need a whole lot, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like when somebody's waiting tables and they're in the weeds and you say, what can I do to help? And they're like, I don't know. I gotta
Yep.
Instead of going like, yeah, I need a water to table 5 and table 4 needs their bill. And if you can check on the appetizers for 6, that'd be awesome
Yeah.
because I got to go take an order.
Yep.
Totally different frame of mind.
Yes.
One's panic first, which is a learned behavior, by the way.
Yep. And I think, there are two things that resonate with me. One of them is, again, it's that experiencing your emotions and managing your mindset. So part of what I think of with mindset is that when people are looking for work, part of it is keeping in mind, I can do this. I will find something. I only need one job. I am going to assume a positive intent when I interact with people and know that not everything is going to work out. It's just being very realistic, but also optimistic about it, just to say, hey, I'm going to not assume the worst about everything that I apply for. So I think just choosing your mindset, also putting yourself in a position where you're driving more things so that you're not just waiting for things to happen to you. And then I think just being ready to pivot and adjust your approach. So
Absolutely.
doing some things and saying, well, this seems to be working, this one isn't, what can I do differently? And then just continuing to evolve as you go. And everything's a process as you
Everything is,
figure out
and it's
how to
all a
do
learning
something better.
experience.
Every bit of it. Correct.
So do you find that most of your clients come from a scarcity mindset?
I think that's pretty natural from a starting point. I
Yeah.
think because a lot of the people that I work with are, are in the professional realm. They've spent, time and money working on their education, working on their skills. I work with a lot of people in the field of learning and development, so they're very engaged in their work and they care a lot about it. And I think when suddenly you find out that you don't get to do that anymore, it's like, but I'm a helper. I help people for a living
Yeah,
and I
that's
was
what I
doing a good
do.
job of helping you. And now I don't get to do that anymore. And I think there's a lot of shock right away. And I think there's a lot of fear, like, oh my goodness, if nobody gives me the title of learning and development professional, who am I? And I think there's that
Oh,
sense of
yeah.
loss and that sense of not knowing what to do and just feeling like everything got pulled out from under you. So I think a lot of that is trying to help people pivot from, oh no, everything's been taken away from me, to saying, hey, you have a wonderful opportunity. And it might not look like that now, but you actually get to pick what you do next. And you get to decide what matters to you, what you like and what you don't like, what you want to do more of and less of. And you get to go out and build that going forward.
So
And
I
it's
think
so
there has to
scary.
be like natural curiosity there.
Yes. Because it's so what I find is that sometimes when people are laid off, especially if they have no idea that it's coming, which a lot of people, if you've never been laid off and you're not looking for signs, it might catch off guard. But I think part of the trick is that if you just do what you've always done and then it ends, you're like, well, I need to go get another job just like that one. And it's
Mhm.
good to step back and say, so is that working? Did you like that?
Did
Were
you
you
even like the
happy?
job? Yeah, were you happy doing it? It's really checking in with yourself
Yes.
and knowing, you have to do a little bit of personal development work here.
Definitely. And it's looking at things like, what are my values? What do I care about? What are my strengths? What are my actual skills? And then what do I like and not like? And what do I want my life to look like as it pertains to work? Do I want to go into an office? Do I want to stay home? How many hours? What do I need to pay my bills? So it's all of those things. And it's at once overwhelming and kind of amazing that you get to identify that and move forward. So yeah, it can be overwhelming, but if you can position it as an opportunity, not one you would have picked right then in most cases, but if you can reposition that, then I think people can start to realize, oh, I get to kind of be in the driver's seat instead of just continuing to do the thing I've always done, which I maybe complained about all the time.
Right. You bring up a good point here. I want to circle back to what you said about job and identity. So a lot of our residents are high performing C-suite
Yep.
executives, professional sports figures, people with very affluent jobs.
Yeah.
And they're all in trouble, right? Nobody gets to our house because they've been good.
Yeah.
They're all like the worst of the worst cases that nobody else will touch. So we put them in a recovery job. That means you don't have to think about anything after you
Yep.
leave. You do this for 6 months to a year. Our minimum commitment for our residences is 6 months. Most people stay a year to a year and a half. So they get a recovery job. The lawyer whose practice wouldn't let her work anymore and said, you go and you get yourself sober and then come back and then we'll go from there. But yeah, your name's on this shingle, but you're not working right now.
Yeah.
And in some cases, not in most cases, we have to walk into the establishment. I live in a town of 70,000 with 20% of its population in recovery. That's 14,000 people. So a lot of our recovery job employers know that it's a recovery town, and we've got relationships with a lot of them. And we'll walk in and we already know the manager. And so we'll get the application with them. We'll actually walk in with them to hand it back in because they've lost confidence in themselves. So they don't look people in the eye. They feel like they're doing something wrong. And so they look like they're doing something wrong.
Yep.
And we can turn that around with just being there, right? Walking alongside someone and supporting them as they're doing the activity until they get the bravado to do it enough for themselves.
Very true.
And then after that year, they're ready to go back to being a lawyer.
Yep.
If you can make it to a year, you have an 80% chance of making it long term. If you don't make it to that year, it drops to less than 15%.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so all of this is really applicable to our clientele and their family members and loved ones who are wondering, what is wrong with my child, husband, whatever, that they can't get and keep a job. And sometimes it is them. I'm not going to lie, but sometimes it's not. It's just skills and abilities that they haven't learned yet.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to just give us some words of wisdom on if you're somebody who's making that transition, you're a C-suite executive and you have to get a loser job for 6 months to a year. We try to do everything as a teaching tool, right? Like you give us notice at the lodge when you're leaving, just like you give notice when you're leaving work, you give a 2 weeks notice. It's just, we were taught that by our families. It's common courtesy, which doesn't seem to be so common anymore. But do you have some tips for somebody that is that high functioning professional that would have to work at a different job for a little bit?
The biggest things that I was thinking about that is that I always feel like sometimes you're in the place you're at in life because there's something else you need to learn or there's something that you're there to get something out of. While I can definitely see that it's hard and it can feel humbling and even like punishment sometimes to have to do something that's not the thing that you trained a long time for and that you're really good for. Hopefully it can be seen as an opportunity to do a job, do some work, do something constructive, not have to worry about it too much and not have to take it home with you. I think that's the biggest thing that's a stressor about being in a high functioning big position is that there's just a lot to manage and you never turn it off. So I think
they take something to get up and something to go to bed.
Yeah. Yep.
They take Adderall so they can perform better at their job.
Yep.
Better.
So yeah.
Until they can't perform anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So, I mean, I think just trying to appreciate the experience and trying to use it as a break from having to do all sorts of things and be responsible for everything and to try and take advantage of that and see it not as punishment, but as time that you
as
get
an
to
opportunity,
take a break. And I'm a big everything's an opportunity person. And what can I learn from this? I also think it's always interesting the things that you can learn when you're put in different situation. And it might be humility, it might be accountability, it might be just how to interact with
gratitude.
Yep, gratitude. So again, just figuring out how to make the most of that experience and taking away from it what you can and appreciating it, not fighting it. I think the hardest thing to do is when there's something that you have to go through. Every ounce of your being is like, I'm going to fight it because I don't want this to happen. Well, it's happening.
It's
You know,
happening.
you're laid off, you're going through recovery, you're dealing with this time of transition. The only way out is through. You
The
have
only way
to
out is
work
through.
through it.
Amen, sister.
And I think that seems like the biggest lesson is that, you know, be where you're at, work through that process, and know that it's kind of like feeling your feelings. You have to do that in order to be successful and keep moving forward. So again, I think it's trust the process, and it's just figure out, why are you in this place? How do you use this time for exploration or for what you need to recover? And how do you use that as like an active rest time too? So I think it's some of those things that can really help you wherever you're at, whatever position you're in, trying to go through it. How do you use that for yourself? How do you
And
use
make
that
the
for
most
your
out of it.
growth?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it's true that while you're going through it, you know, it didn't take you a few minutes to get in this predicament. It's going to take you more than a few minutes to get out of it. You know, give
Yeah.
yourself the time and the space to say, oh, okay, I screwed up. Maybe I screwed up. Maybe I screwed up a lot, but nothing is irreparable, you know, and we really are in a unique position right now. Since 2019, addiction, overdose, suicide, and mental health are up 40%. And it isn't being addressed anywhere. They're feeling it in the workplace.
Yep. Yep.
They're seeing it in their bottom lines.
Yep. Very
You
true.
know, we're talking about the business of recovery.
Yep.
Somebody's benefiting, and it's, I don't think it's us. Yeah. But you know, I really appreciate your perspective, and I think that this message is really going to resonate with our audience. We're coming to the end of our time here together, but so I wanted to ask you, if you can get in your time machine and go back to the Brenda who before she was laid off 7 times, what do you think you would say to yourself to help you navigate this journey, weather the storms, whatever metaphor you want to use?
So I definitely think a couple of things. One of them is, just continue to learn and grow and figure out what you actually want. I think it, you know, earlier career, I would kind of go job to job, and I was always getting something more that I wanted at a different job, but I don't think it was very purposeful. And I think that one of the things that being laid off has helped me to do is to take that time to reflect and think about what I want and where I'm going. So I think building more of that in beforehand, that reflection and what's my why and where do I want to go and how do I stay in the driver's seat of my life. I think all of those
That's
things
it.
would have been very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that comes to mind is, self-doubt is not very useful, because when I think of all the things that I've ever doubted myself doing, um, I had the capability. I just didn't necessarily always have the confidence to do it. So I think making sure that I trusted, what's my gut feeling? What is that telling me is going on here? Maybe as I'm looking at a job, I ask better questions and say, okay, how is the financial status of your company? Where are you at right now? And knowing what to do with that information to decide if that was a good choice for me for a next employer. So I think just being more mindful overall, taking a little bit more control over my life and driving instead of waiting quite so much.
Or even
And
trying
yeah,
to meet other people's expectations.
yeah. And I think it's a little bit of discernment, in
Absolutely.
that when people tell you things, because by nature, I want to like everybody and I want to believe everybody. And while I
Me
think
too.
on many cases that's good and that's a way I like to live, sometimes you need to be like, okay, something doesn't feel quite right. I need to ask another question, or I need to check this out a little bit more. I need to trust and verify. So I think it's driving a little bit more, being a little bit more responsible for what I'm doing and how I navigate my life and my career, and probably just life in general. And just doing a little bit more research and not being afraid to make my own way like I needed to.
Wow. I really thank you for being here today. You've dropped some really good nuggets of wisdom. Um, we will make sure to put all of your links in the show notes.
Sounds
Hold
good.
that book up again, 7 Lessons from 7 Layoffs.
Yay.
So everybody run out and get Brenda's book, because I think she's learned a lot from being laid off.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you for tuning in to Recovery Comes Home Radio. We hope that today's episode has provided you with valuable information and insights on the recovery process. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Keep seeking support, practicing self-care, and moving forward one step at a time. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and stay humble. Hope lives here.